Exactly sure on that. Here's a picture just before she was opened. The old New England Greyhound yellow Streamliner 843 sitting out there. Yeah, I don't know why. Almost invariably, too, every time we got there, we got that booth that was right by, well, there is a cashier's counter right here, as you can see. No, that isn't the cashier's counter, but there was one there. Oh, wait a minute, right. There was a petition there, a girder, and on the other side is where we sat by the cashier's counter, because it always had so many neat things like Greyhound tie bars and belt buckles and arcade buses, and then finally, of course, the incredible Dubuque Silverside, which I wished I owned a case of today. But after we left there, we were just a few hours out of my favorite place, my grandma's house, and the Big Apple. Well, of course it wasn't called the Big Apple in those days. I took Telly Savalas and Kojak. But that was paradise to this boy. Capitol Greyhound, 50th Street, Midtown Manhattan. Right around the corner from Jack Dempsey's bar and Broadway. You could see her from Broadway. Oh, this was the... Oh, was this exotic? Oh, was this exotic to me? I mean, oh my. Very exotic. I got to see all kinds of stuff here. She would last into the 60s, but City of New York would force them to close, so they had to use Port Authority. Greyhound went kicking and screaming into Port Authority, I want to tell you. The fight actually began in the 40s. Yeah, she was paradise, all right. Of course, what I really liked about it was the activity. That's what I found exciting. At night, she was beautiful. She had one of those running Greyhound dogs at the top of that Art Deco period time sign, because she was built during the height of the Art Deco period. Little Tours and Charter sign there too, holding the main portico together. Now they had to rake the sign in so the buses turning in on the east side could get past the sign. The sign hung out too far, so they had to rake it in at an angle. Greyhound had the west side of the terminal. They had to raise that passenger shelter up when the Scenicruisers came through it by, I think it was 1.5 feet. On the east side of the terminal was the tenants, the connecting carriers. Now, the very first day that I can recall, I pulled in and I spied, we went into the inside of the terminal, which I'll show you in a second, and I spied through one of the loading gates in Edwards Lakes to see ACF P-37. Heart stopped. Here's an Edwards Lakes to see just before they closed the terminal, 4104, with their little nose sticking in there. And it was here that my learning curve began, and I was made aware that there are other carriers in the world that are pretty besides Greyhound. One of my favorites was Warwick Stage Lines right here. They came into 50th Street. Of course, at the close of the war, when I saw the brand new IC-41s of Warwick Stage Lines, oh. And of course I loved them in Greyhound. I loved them in everybody's colors. It was an exceptionally classic coach. I don't remember too much the engine forwards on Greyhound. I saw some of them over in Long Island City parked against the wall but they were pretty much done when I started realizing that I love buses. They would, however, be years before they disappeared from the Jersey scene, so I got to see them. I wasn't a big lover of them. For some odd reason, they didn't tickle my fancy like the mighty 743 did. And I wasn't that much of a lover of Silversides either, because they were taking away my beautiful 743 from me. Now, there are some pictures in existence from the 50th Street side, but from 51st Street, pictures from that, shooting in from that end, are very rare. She sat on the site of the old Capitol Theater. Oh, and by the way, this is 51st Street side. They bought a theater that was failing. As vaudeville was starting to slow down and the movies were killing them, they bought the Capitol Theater on 50th Street. Raised it, because it went right through the block. It was ideally suited. See, a lot of people think Capitol Greyhound came here. Capitol Greyhound didn't even come to New York. Capitol Greyhound was primarily a Cincinnati, Washington corridor carrier. Now, you came in from 50th Street through this set of doors. This is 51st Street over here. They had these beautiful curved arch glass panels here. If anything ever happened to them, I don't know what Greyhound would have ever done to replace them. You came in here, there was an information counter, ticket booths, a waiting area, and this killer little newsstand over here that had the Greyhound gribbles, you know, the little toys and the tie tacks and all that stuff. You went down to the restrooms here. There's this big lunch counter which I ate at a million times, and then of course the tour desk, which had just a bazillion old timetables and whatnot out there for you to play with and steal. Well, you didn't steal them; they're out there for public, so I didn't steal them. Now, initially, like I said, the buses all came in from 50th Street. Greyhound on this side, this was theirs. This side up here was the tenants. Now, in this architectural rendering from the Thomas Lamb Company, the buses actually ended up coming in this way later. It didn't work out well to have them come in from 51st Street. They had to go out and then go down Broadway. They didn't like that. So everybody went out 51st Street, everybody, and they could make for the tunnel or 8th Avenue real easy to get out of town. Now, in the early days of Pennsylvania Greyhound, which was called People's Rapid Transit, again owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad, they were directly on 34th Street, directly across from the 34th Street foyer for Pennsylvania Railroad Station. You can see right here, you know, buses leave for Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, Washington, Atlantic City, Chicago, 20 hours. New London, 4 hours. Providence, 4 hours. 4 hours and 30 minutes. Boston, 4 hours? No, I'm sorry. Those are not hours. Those are dollars. I was going to say, yeah, Boston in 4 hours in those days? I don't think so. This is a very rare photograph. I don't know of any other existing pictures of the original storefront on 34th Street. However, in 1935, the Thomas Lamb Company, which was one of Greyhound's favorites and one of the Art Deco period killer design houses, architectural design houses, built this on the site. New York's first Art Deco Greyhound terminal. The old 34th Street terminal. She was a beauty. Brought online in 1935. Technically, she was the first real Greyhound terminal in New York, because she was opened in 36. and 50th Street did not make it till I think it was early 38. Now back in those days, they were getting away from it, but luggage would be carried on the roof and then taken. They would walk, the red caps would walk along this roof to this door over here, and it was a freight elevator, which would take it downstairs. Here's her floor plan. You would enter on 33rd Street. It had a big restaurant because they had a lot of office around them, and is where the coaches all landed. Now I never got down here very often because it involved a subway change, and I wasn't too keen on that when I was a little fella. As a matter of fact, I had a ritual. It was tradition. I would come in from Astoria, go to Times Square Station, go upstairs and go to this haunted automat, which used to be a New York institution once upon a time. Seems a little hokey now. I mean, automat. I get my egg custard, then proceed up Broadway by Jack Dempsey's place by 50th Street, and there was a Needix there. Needix used to dispense orange soda and hot dogs. And I got my dessert, ate my dessert first, then got my orange soda and my hot dog, and pulled this all off for 50 cents. The old automats, you would put the change in the slot, and then you'd pull a lever, and out would come your egg custard, or whatever you happen to have chose. Why they chose to face 34th Street away from the railroad station, I'm not quite sure. I could speculate that they didn't want people getting too close to the railroad station, I guess. There was only the one loading area. It was not dual-sided like 50th Street was. What's that you say? Yes, as a matter of fact, it is the GX-2 Greyhound Scenicruiser, the original one and only of a kind, when she was on display. Did the people have an interest? Those folks are all lined up to get aboard that bus. If Greyhound reinvented the Scenicruiser again today, they may very well save their little butts, which is, of course, something they need desperately. Now, here is a picture that can truly be judged rare. This was the 34th Street entrance, 34th Street side. As you can see, it was definitely not the main entrance. The main entrance, even though they called it the 34th Street Greyhound Terminal, the main entrance was on 33rd Street. There's an Asbury Park, New York Transit 4101 sitting in there. Penn Greyhound 3702 down there, and sitting on the wall, New England Greyhound 3751. Looks like a cabbie sitting there, waiting for a fare. Those of us from New York, oh boy, we remember these. The famous New York City Police Department bus stop arrows. Where did they all go? There were millions of them. God, I'd like to have one of those at Bus Bash today. No parking. Police Department, City of New York, bus stop. But this is what killed 34th Street Greyhound Station and 50th Street Greyhound Station. City of New York erected the Port Authority Bus Terminal, which exists to this very day, although not even remotely in this configuration. It's been remodeled. I couldn't even begin to imagine how many times. Of course, things in the 30s were happening all across the land. They weren't happening just in New York. Take, for instance, this little old girl here, 1946. Anybody got an idea? Take a guess. Los Angeles, California. That was her, 1946. Of course, out west they were great for building pull-through Greyhound stations. Yeah, the coaches would come around the building and come out here. That was very, very common. As a matter of fact, nearly all the major Greyhound stations did not have loading gates in the west. It was a thing Southwestern Greyhound and Pacific Greyhound just happened to get involved with. Seattle, Washington, same procedure. Pull-throughs. Although those coaches you see nosed in, that's the city bus system. Anybody care to hazard a guess what those are? Those are old Pacific car and foundries. All along the systems nationwide, you saw these old roadhouses giving way to new modern facilities. This is Southeastern Greyhound, Williamstown, Kentucky. One of their rest stops. Places like Little Marshalltown, Iowa, they're giving up the ghost. Giving up the ghost big time. Quite a few facilities, like this one at Somerset, Kentucky, actually had motel units attached to it. Of course, the biggest and most expensive, I guess, Greyhound venture that ever existed was the modification of Jewfish Key down in the Florida Keys. They bought the whole entire Jewfish Key and built a facility there called Greyhound Tropical Key. Oh, they just thought they'd come a flock in here. It did a little bit of business, but for what Greyhound thought, you know, owning a nationwide bus system that they could lure people to Greyhound Tropical Key for a winter vacation, well, that just never materialized. But I tell you one thing, I've got some really old, rare rolling footage of Greyhound Tropical Key I'll show you right now. Now, in reality, Greyhound Tropical Key was, if you looked in National Geographic, Jewfish Key, which of course is still there today. And they anticipated making a mini resort with swimming pool, on-site post house. Actually, it was halfway to Key West, so it was a legitimate post house that served extraordinarily good food for the area, you know, seafood and whatnot. Had all those bungalows back there. It had a beach and a Gulf if you wanted to go in the water, salt water, or it had a really killer pool too. Now this is from an old Greyhound travel log. This is. Now here's another interesting old Greyhound travel log. Now this is Wytheville, Virginia, which was a very important post house. Very important. And there was this fella chasing this girl on a Greyhound all over America, everywhere. He was hot to get her. He finally did at the last 3 minutes of the movies, but everywhere she went, he was always minutes behind. But look at that, isn't that beautiful? Wytheville was very important because it was at the junction of an east. Here he goes. Oh my gracious, there's Mildred. It was at the junction of an east-west, north-south crossroads, and it was one of Greyhound's really premier showcase. Wytheville itself, just a little tiny town. The building still exists. So very important was it was an east-west crossing and north-south crossing junction point. The coaches coming out of Washington and the coaches coming down from the north through the Shenandoah Valley. And it was naturally a big interchange point as well. Certain times of the days and night, you could see some buses in Wytheville. That's right. Colored waiting room. And if they got anything to eat, they had to get it and take it back here. They couldn't sit at the counters out in the main terminal waiting room. It was her front elevation on Main Street. Terminal still, the post house still exists today. It's all boarded up, or at least it did the last time I went through Wytheville. Of all the Greyhound terminals of the land, probably one of the most interesting is Washington, D.C., and the terminal that used to be on New York Avenue. She went through several modifications. I don't even remotely know how many faceliftings she went through. She went through 1 million faceliftings. Here she is with a little more Art Deco type style affair to her. With her last one looking like this. They completely covered in everything. But then the most amazing thing happened. The terminal was sold. There was to be a big high-rise put up on her site. And the people that were constructing the terminal decided that New York Avenue Greyhound Terminal should be restored to its original 1930 Art Deco period. And amazingly as it may sound, they did it. Greyhound station I ever knew that was built on an island affair, a circular affair here. This magnificent waiting room, and boy, she had some gates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 gates. Not only that, boy, them things are full most of the time too. That was one busy Greyhound station. Capital, Pennsylvania, Atlantic, all using it. Oh my, was that a busy little place. This is the inside of her great circular half circle waiting room. Well, that place was always mobbed right up to the end, I want to tell you. Here's what you encounter today. Actually, it was inherited when they bought Trailways. This was the new Trailways terminal. Somewhat interesting. It only has one side loading. You're looking at it. Oh, by the way, what's even more interesting, this is a little bit of an excerpt from one of the bussin' rounds. When this video was done, Peter Pan and Greyhound were at war with each other. You know, Peter Pan runs New York, Washington, and they had their new MC-12 out there to counteract Peter Pan's $9 one-way fare, and it finally got down to $5. But the MC-12 looked amazingly like this MC-9 coming around the corner here. Not only that, Peter Pan had on his line C3 video-equipped, movie-equipped buses. Now, not a whole heck of a lot knew about Peter Pan before these fare wars began, but CNN picked up on it and several of the other networks, and pretty soon Peter Pan had a $50 million worth of free publicity. They virtually own everything from Boston to Washington now as far as line travel goes, because their equipment's dependable. Greyhound, you don't always know whether you're going to get a bus anymore or whether they'll allow you to continue on in your journey. It's a shambles. It's what happens when bankers run bus companies and they don't have any idea or concept of the bus industry. They kick the people that feed them, the interline people that feed them, they kick them out of the terminals. Does that make sense or what? Greyhound's losing money again as this video is made in 1994. Be interesting to see whether they get by Labor Day. All across the land. The old stations were giving up the ghost, like this one at Charleston, West Virginia. That's a predecessor coach to Atlantic Greyhound coming out of there. It's a blue and a gray yellow Z250. in what can be considered an exceedingly